Welcome to the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel, powered by InsideTexas.com. I'm Joe Cook. I'm stepping in for LC this week as he's off in some faraway place doing faraway things. But we got another edition of the Saturday Roundtable. We'll talk a lot about Texas football. We'll talk about Texas football opponents, Texas football recruiting, and also a little bit of Texas basketball as later tonight, the Longhorns will face old coach Rick Barnes in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel so we can bring you a bunch of great content on a daily basis. We will go over some of Steve Sarkisian's comments about defensive tackle, some of the latest going-ons at Michigan and Oklahoma, two teams on Texas 2024 schedule. Talk about the Elite 11, which is in Austin this weekend, and KJ Lacey, Texas commit, is expected to be there. And, of course, then we will get to the NCAA tournament. Real quick, Ian, what's been your takeaway from some of the things we've heard from spring football so far through two practices, and there's probably one going on right now as people are watching this?
Sark's tone made it seem like this team is going to be a little more offensive than before, which is what you'd expect. They have a returning quarterback. The offensive line looks like it could be like an all-time dominant line for Texas. And then they got all these transfers at receiver, so there's not as much drop-off there. But just the way he talked about it, when he would talk about defense, he's offensively, he sounds like very confident and very comfortable, right? And then when he talked about his defense, he sounded a little bit more hesitant and qualified. Am I right?
Yeah, he had a little bit more of a, we're going to figure it out, or we hope to figure it out. And I think that leads perfect into our first topic, that they're looking at depth, or they're looking for depth at defensive tackle. And something you wrote a lot about last year, and something that we saw with our own eyes, was running up the middle, whether it was from spread formations or whether it was from heavy formations where it invited a third defensive tackle on the field, was just a non-starter for opposing offenses because of Tavondre Sweat, because of Byron Murphy. And that was kind of the second straight year that was the case when you go back to 2022 and think of Keandre Coburn and Moro Ojimo. When we entered 2023, there was a clear successor, or a duo of successors in Sweat and Murphy. That's not exactly the case this upcoming season as far as level of play. I think we all expect Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins to be those first two defensive tackles on the field in Pete Kwiatkowski's 2-4-5 scheme. But after that, they brought in a transfer in Tia'ali'i Savea to try to shore up depth. And then it's a little bit unknown. So Sark talked about that the other day at his Tuesday press conference. Based off what we've heard on Inside Texas and what we've heard from Sark, what are your kind of takeaways at this juncture? And could we maybe see, even, looking 6 months ahead, a little bit change in philosophy in how they rotate at defensive tackle on the Longhorn DL?
The rotations may be different. The strategy may be a little different because they just don't have the big space eaters anymore, right? Like Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins have both gained weight. But is that because they're going to trying to do what Murphy and Sweat did, or just because they need to be a little stouter against the run, but they still should maybe play a different style? So, I mean, there's the question of whether they play them a little bit differently, maybe a little less of a space-eating philosophy and more of a movement philosophy. There's can they play Collins and Broughton together, or is there too much overlap and they need to both be accompanied by maybe a stouter guy? And then there's could Tiwali Savea or Jere Blitzo end up being one of the better tackles? I think Collins is going to be the best tackle on the team. And then I don't know about you, I'm a little less confident that Vernon Broughton will be the second best. I think he might be, but I think Savea or Bledsoe could also end up being the second best, or maybe even Brian or Sydir Mitchell with a big offseason. Less likely, but so I mean there's a lot of different question marks, and they're not, if they're going to mix it up and do a bunch of new things, they're not going to show it and make that plain to us, right, in the media, because then we'll blab will blab it to everybody. So there's a lot of wait and see here.
Yeah, obviously they don't take somebody at defensive tackle unless they think they need to shore it up. Because even Sarkeesian himself has admitted some of the things that they use the transfer portal for is covering holes in recruiting. And when one of your you sign what, two defensive tackles in 2 years between Sadir Mitchell and also Alex January, with a little bit of positional versatility with Melvin Hills. Yeah, you're going to need that, especially when you go into a league in the SEC that does have more spread concepts, as you've written about often, but they still have big humans on that line of scrimmage and on that offensive front. So they don't take a transfer. They don't, unless they think A, he can play, and B, they need him. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of Savea on the first team. But Jare Bledsoe is somebody who played meaningful snaps. If you remember Anthony Hill's sack of Jalen Milroe, the second one, that was the Crimson Tide's last offensive play of the game, Jare Bledsoe was out there. And that said a lot to me. Of course, he's athletic. He's got pass rush ability with that athleticism and that frame, at least in the 2023 season. But they trusted him for real snaps at that point, and they're only going to trust him some more. Sadir Mitchell, 372. That sounds like a space eater, but what's the concern there? Even Steve Sarkeesian said that they may want to get him a little bit lighter so he can play more plays. So aside from conditioning, like what and also going down the depth chart, looking at guys like you mentioned, Aaron Bryant, even someone like Zach Swanson, further down, Alex January, who's received some positive comments. Like, who are some other guys you could see maybe stepping up to contend for being in those first two lines, or first two shifts, to maybe use it in a hockey term for Texas?
I think that Bledsoe, Broughton, Savea, and Collins are your first two like hockey lines. If they play more three down, then now you need to get a Mitchell, a Bryant, a Swanson up to snuff, or maybe you go transfer portal. Like there's like the Indiana kid, Philip. What's his last name?
Philip Bleedy, I believe.
Weedy. Um, to me, a guy like that, there's probably going to be a few guys like that in the transfer portal. They're like pretty good defensive tackles that can hold their own, like Trill Carter a year ago. Guys like that, though, Texas has guys like that. So I don't understand why they would get more unless they needed more because they're going to play like more three down fronts. And so they needed more bodies. But there's usually not a guy that's going to be like a Sweat or a Murphy that's like he's going to anchor one of your lines and be a star. He's just not in the transfer portal. That just almost never happens. Um, so yeah, I think pretty much what we see is what we're going to get in the fall, and they're just trying to figure out. The summer will help in getting Sadir Mitchell's weight down, and it'll probably also hurt in keeping Swanson and Bledsoe's weight up, right? So they'll mess around with everything and see what they can put together in the fall.
Yeah, when I'm glad you brought that up about the portal, because it's like, go get that guy in the portal. Well, they have to jump in there, and I think what the most premium defensive tackle that we can think of who's jumped in is probably Bear Alexander, right? Over the past couple of years, who went from Georgia to USC. I know Trill Carter was a solid rotational piece, but it's not like he was, a first team All Big Ten guy jumping in. And I know there's a lot of wishful thinking surrounding Michigan and surrounding their situation right now, but
Yeah,
those guys still haven't jumped in yet. And until they do, then you're just wish casting, hoping that like an All American shows up. But that's not what you find typically in the portal. And if they do show up in there, well, you better get your checkbook out, because they are going to be drawing a lot of hypothetical salary cap percentage at that point.
yeah, and Michigan, it's been nonstop. Those guys are very well situated at Michigan. They have scheme continuity. They're going to start. Um, Michigan's NIL has been more and more with it, in the last few years. I just don't think that's going to happen. The other hope was that like A&M has been stockpiling defensive tackles that everybody else has wanted, and It's like, well, they have a coaching change. So let's look for these guys. Maybe after spring, maybe, but they hung them onto him for spring, and just like once you get past that initial, like the longer they just stick around, the more there's inertia to just stay.
Yeah,
So
and I neglected to mention you speaking of Texas A&M defensive lineman, obviously Walter Nolan. But
oh
if
yeah.
anything about how those recruitments have gone and things like that, we see why Ole Miss was able to do well as they're going for it. But let's talk a little bit about, like you mentioned, Michigan. It's been there has been inertia with Sharon Moore, a very familiar face up there. But at the same time, there's been a lot of change. They're obviously going to lose a considerable chunk of players who helped them to a national championship this upcoming season. That includes JJ McCarthy, and it includes Brock Corum, and it includes, how do you say his name, Mike Sanderstrill. So those are some of the big pieces on that team. Even Roman Wilson, a wide receiver who, depending on what you view the or how you view the Wolverine offense, still was a big part of it. Lose Jim Harbaugh, so that's a great football mind leaving the building. You lose Jesse Minter, who's been, as you've written plenty, on the cutting edge of current defense. And they basically replace those two. So you have Sharon Moore stepping in for Harbaugh, probably keeping himself as play caller. And then you have Wink Martindale coming from the NFL and stepping in for Jesse Minter, who runs some things that are similar, but also some things that are way different philosophically as far as pressure, things like that. So let's start with, I guess, the Sharon Moore aspect, not necessarily as an offensive coordinator, but as a head coach, the staff that he has, that type of thing from an organizational structure. What have you seen from Sharon Moore, considering you're on the ground up in the Lower Peninsula?
yeah, the lower. Uh,
Mitten.
yeah, in the Upper Peninsula, they call the people in the Lower Peninsula trolls because they're under the bridge, But there's only like 10 of them, so um, you know, when they promoted him from like tight end coach to offensive line coach, I was kind of surprised because when they did that, it was like a make or break year for Harbaugh. It was after 2020, and when they promoted him, they went back to uh, more of a smash mouth power offense, like Harbaugh's done. Before that, they've been running like inside zone spread with this guy who had been at like Notre Dame and had been at Ohio State with Urban Meyer and had been at Kansas with Mark Mangino. And so they go back to this more power smash mouth style with this guy that had not been an offensive line coach before. And I thought that was kind of strange and risky. And it went really well. And it turns out that he's like an amazing position coach. I really connected with his players. He's been a great recruiter. They use the portal well, which is hard to do in Michigan because their academic requirements for transfers is not lenient for grad transfers. Um, and they've been remarkable at it. Now, I would worry as a Michigan fan, like, so it turns out he has these like recruiting and coaching chops that had not seen the light of day previously at his previous jobs. Okay, that was a good stroke of luck. But now is he also going to prove to have like staff hiring and management skills? I don't know. And a lot of what he's done so far with the Michigan staff is just internal promotions. Like aim for continuity and promote from within. And that's great when you have talented people around waiting in the wings, and it's not great when you don't. Like Dabo Swinney, right? We did that for years, and then they like ran out of creative people, and they like everything went to hell like in a season. So I don't know. And then Wink Martindale is like another example of like what's the easiest continuity hire we could make. Because Wink Martindale was the guy who taught the system to their last two defensive coordinators at Baltimore. And those younger guys that they hired actually ended up updating and reorganizing it, making it better, particularly Mike McDonald, um, who's now like the head coach of the Seahawks, right?
Correct.
Um, so they just bring in Wink Martindale because he can't hold a job in the NFL anymore. And it's like, hey, run this system that your young guys developed beyond you, you know, like how's that going to go? Probably okay, great. I don't know. I don't know. Um, so I'm pretty mixed on things, but the thing with Michigan this coming season is that they still have inertia. That word we've been using a lot because they still have like uh, off the top of my head like 5 or 6 NFL prospects on their defense, including the 2 tackles, and the defense is why they won the national championship last year. So if Martindale can maintain like decent continuity on the defense with all these guys, they're going to be really good on defense again. And then it just comes down to if Sharon Moore can rebuild the offense with players that he knows because they've been in the program. And I don't, that's kind of up in the air. But yeah.
It seems like the question for Sharon Moore, the biggest one he may have to answer this offseason is what do you do at quarterback? Do you go with what is it? It's Alex Orgy, or and then there's Jack Tuttle, who's like a 15th year senior. And then there's guys in the recruiting class. I think they pulled a very talented quarterback from the Carolinas or Florida, somewhere in the Southeast, somewhere on the East Coast, who is going to compete to succeed JJ McCarthy. So quarterback play is going to be something to track, and along with that quarterback play, whether they reshape the offense that Sharon Moore's been running with both JJ McCarthy and under Jim Harbaugh. Anything else on Michigan before you want to look a little bit north of the Red River?
I think the spoiler is going to be that Michigan is going to be the same, only without, instead of having a bigger emphasis on like Jim Harbaugh's West Coast passing stuff, they're going to just run a lot of power option with Orgy because he is like, I don't know how well he throws. I don't know if I've ever seen him even try a pass except for like a lateral bubble screen or something. But he's like 6'3", 230, and like probably better than 4'6", 40 speed. He's a big old freak. He's like, it's. I think that they're going to be kind of like the Milroe, Alabama team that Texas played this last fall in terms of their offense and their style. And
I was
they
about
have
to say,
they
would
do
it be
have an
Snyder
NFL
Ball
talent.
adjacent?
Yeah, yeah.
Something like that. Well, a team that has different questions at quarterback, but doesn't seem like they have a battle. They don't have a battle. Obviously, is Oklahoma. They have Jackson Arnold coming in, the successor to Dylan Gabriel, started the Alamo Bowl against Arizona. Not only that, Jeff Lebby has taken the head coaching job at Mississippi State, so they have a combination of Joe John Finley, and you're gonna have to remind me the old North Texas coach who is also there,
Seth Luttrell.
Seth Luttrell. And those guys come from slightly well. Luttrell comes from an air raid background, but Finley definitely comes from the veer and shoot Brylesian background. Obviously, Brent Venables is there controlling that defense. They hired a Jacksonville State assistant, Zach Alley, who had been part of Venables, I think, system dating back to days at Clemson. So, despite a lot of new faces, both on the sidelines and at the quarterback position, they're going to be running, I feel like, a lot of the same stuff. But what is as Oklahoma also, like Texas, goes in the first year in the SEC? What are some of the things to track? Maybe from let's start at quarterback. Let's go with Jackson Arnold, especially within that Luttrell and Finley offense.
If you read like the optimistic Oklahoma stuff out there, it is all assuming that Jackson Arnold is like nails next year and just has this huge leap and is a 5-star stud and goes and dominates with a what is admittedly a pretty solid looking receiving core, right? And some good backs too. I think that is over optimistic. Everyone will be shocked that I have a pessimistic view about Oklahoma. The dude, well, first of all, I think the days of freshmen and underclassmen starters being awesome in college have come and gone. It was like a brief window in the 2010s where you could play like a freshman or sophomore and you could kill teams and they would be fine. Defenses have caught up the spread does not turn offense into easy mode in the same way it used to. And I think these young quarterbacks struggle. Arnold, in particular, is a guy that's like all world throwing ability and some running ability, but he does his best in RPOs and in plays where it's like he knows where the ball is going and he's just got to hit his mark, kind of like Quinn Ewers. So like just like Quinn Ewers, it took him till last year, right, to really be an effective hang your hat kind of guy offensively. Um, I I would be shocked if Arnold is as good as he needs to be for them to be awesome next year. And then there's the other thing with them, which is that they are replacing their entire offensive line and almost their entire defensive tackle rotation. So it's all new transfers and young guys at the big guy spots going into the big guy league. And I think that that's really tough. And it's not something that Oklahoma's used to because they're used to having the best offensive line in the Big 12 by usually a pretty wide margin. And then also having one of the better defensive lines and being one of the few teams that can consistently count on having like an NFL caliber defensive tackle. And that they're going to may or may not have either of those advantages next year in a league where the gap is they're going to be like on the other end of they're going to see how the other half lives basically.
It's hard to bet against Bill Bedenbaugh with that offensive line, but I think at a certain
Sure.
point he does have to have the clay to mold. And to his credit, he recruits well. Like you said, they usually have league best, league standard when it comes to offensive line, but the standard is definitely going to change. And the portal was not overly kind to them on the offensive line front, especially as they lose. I think they lose what's his name, Caden Green, correct, to somebody on their schedule in Missouri. So that
Yeah.
doesn't help them at all. Their defense, they're still going to have some talent on that defense, and the system is not changing. I think Zach Alley is there to be mostly a conduit from Brent Venables. Even if Brent Venables isn't calling plays, Zach Alley's been with Venables for a while, knows how he operates. What's the strength of that Sooner defense likely to probably be in the secondary, right? Considering some of the pieces they have coming back at linebacker and at safety.
So one interesting thing about Alley actually is that he ran Venables' version of the flyover at Jacksonville State. So I think that he would be comfortable with the whole Venables playbook, but you wonder if Oklahoma does lean back into that this year, the flyover, especially given how thin their defensive tackle room appears to be. But actually, aside from defensive tackle, they do have one good guy there, Dejon Terry, that's like a pretty proven solid player. They have the safeties look pretty good. The linebacker looks good because Stutzman came back. Their best corner, Gentry Williams, came back. They have DFW stars of the past, Billy Bowman and Peyton Bowen, who both could be like really coming into their own this year.
They're all
Uh,
conference good, probably. They have all conference potential.
yeah, for sure. They may also move Woody Washington back to safety. That's their corner. That's like a fifth or sixth year guy now. Um, and then they could play Bowman or Bowen at nickel. You just get more talent on the field. So they have they have a lot of edges that are really good too. So like any position, any of the like speed, athleticism positions, Venables has really restocked them and gotten a lot of like length and quickness on the field. It's just those big guy spots which are so already hard, and then he's coming from behind Alex Grinch, who like did not recruit big people. So they they're a mixed bag on defense. It would be shocking if they were bad, though, right? It's like Venables, all these athletes. They'll probably be pretty good. Texas should definitely have their head on a swivel going into Dallas.
So that'll kind of seal it up for Oklahoma and Michigan talk. We'll have plenty of opportunity over the course of the season. Heck, we'll probably get with our friends over at Sooner Scoop talking about them We do have a little bit of recruiting to touch on, and that is the Elite 11. They have a bunch of different regionals around the country. This week, this Sunday, it'll be in Austin at Westlake High School. And KJ Lacey, Texas 2025 commit, is scheduled to be there. There are also some 2026 quarterbacks in the on the roster as far as guys they could check out. One is Jake Fett from El Paso del Valle. Another is, I'm looking through the list right now and trying to see who jumps out. Weston Nielsen, who's from nearby Bastrop. He's in the 2027 class. Going further, Grant Smith from Grand Oaks, I think in Conroe. Kevin Speary, who is listed from Carl Albert, but he's moved to the Denton area, correct?
Yeah.
So there's going to be some quarterback talent here in Austin. Obviously, there's going to be some skill talent there to throw to them. We will have all that info over on Inside Texas. But as it pertains to Lacey, if he shows up, if he's throwing at the home of the Chaps, what do you want to, as far as, seeing clips from him or how he performs? What are things you're looking out for aside from his size, which we've heard in recent weeks and months? It's looking more and more like he's a high school sophomore and junior and senior that is growing, as opposed to someone who's going to be stuck at Bryce Young's size for his college career.
I think the best things to look for in those drill deals are like arm strength and quickness of the release. Now, sometimes guys can get those right, and then their mechanics can break down a little bit when there are people trying to hurt them on the field. But I would see. I'm curious, like how his arm strength develops as he gets bigger. My memory is that it was pretty good, and he was a slight guy. So that seems like it would stand to reason that it could get even better as he fills out his frame. That'd be the main thing I'd look for. I'm very wary in general of trying to make too much of those camps. Yeah.
No, I understand that. I mean, part of it for me is we've always heard he's got good accuracy. I think he has some mechanic things to shore up, but I've always really thought that his processing was a step ahead of a lot of other quarterbacks in his class. A lot of that processing is made considerably easier when you can throw to Ryan Williams, who's a 5-star who's going to be on Alabama's roster this upcoming, or is on Alabama's roster right now. But I've always thought that he's had that knack. So I too am curious to see arm strength. If he still has that processing ability in the 7-on-7 aspect, and then also how his accuracy is. Just kind of curious as well to see how his recruitment is. He's been saying all the right things about Texas, but he's from the Mobile area. And when you're from the Mobile area, when you're a top quarterback, there are 2 schools in that area, and maybe even 3 within about a 4-hour radius that are going to continue to recruit you hard. That's definitely Auburn, definitely Alabama, and obviously Ole Miss as well. So I'm real curious to see how that sounds. I'm also just kind of curious to see what the 2026 class is like. At this point, it looks, I mean, at least based off early offers, they have an offer out to a kid from Nashville. They have an offer out to someone from California, from I can't remember where exactly. And then they also just offered Dia Bell, Raja's son, the other day after he came in town for a spring practice, and he goes to American Heritage in Fort Lauderdale, I believe. So the 26 class is going to be one to watch. I'm curious if any of these guys show out enough to where I'm kind of thinking, okay, maybe Texas should look in state, even though we know that AJ Milwee, Steve Sarkisian, everybody involved when it comes to quarterbacks, they go all over the country, whether that's New Orleans, whether that's Jay Serra in California, or whether that's someone who's transferring from Columbus, Ohio, trying to come back home. We'll end real quick with the Texas Longhorns in the NCAA tournament. They won a defensive slog, to say the least, on Thursday, limiting the Colorado State Rams to a season low in points, 44, I believe it was. But on the other end, Texas only scored 56. got double-digit scoring contributions from Dylan Dessou, who, even though he scored 12, did not have a good game offensively, still made an impact on defense. Max Asmus only scored 12. And then you had Kendall Weaver add 11, I believe, and get points in his Kendall Weaver way. The defense, a lot of it was a result of course, Colorado State missing some decent looks, but a lot of it was Texas making decent looks turn into tough looks. So, what stood out to you about the Colorado State game, and then what do you want to see going forward as Texas takes on the old friend Rick Barnes with a place in the Sweet 16 on the line?
Yeah, I think I had Colorado State winning in my bracket, and then I started, but I hadn't watched them this year. It was just based on a feel for what kind of team they had and some of Paul's observations, and then watching them, it was like, oh, they're too slow and unathletic. Like they cannot get their shots up against Texas. Texas is just swarming them defensively. Um, I think that's every game that Texas wins in the tournament has to look that way. They need a lot of Weaver, a lot of defense. They're not going to figure out offense tomorrow and be good. Like Colorado State giving them trouble is just probably just the beginning, right? Like in a second round game, maybe the prep from the opponent is a little more limited. But if they beat Tennessee, then the next round, that team is going to have them so well scouted. They're not going to be able to score very well. But they can be so good on defense. And I mean, they'll go as far as the defense can carry them. Do you think it can get them past Tennessee, or are you selling?
I don't know. Tennessee, the style of play that it would take Texas to execute perfectly to win is kind of Tennessee's home base. They have and not only that, they have a first team All American in Dalton Connect. We know Rick Barnes teams are always big on defense, but they won the SEC regular season title. They bowed out early to Mississippi State in the SEC tournament, but they took pretty easy care of their 15 seed, not letting that become an issue at all. It's the way we saw Texas stay in front of pretty much everybody but Isaiah Stevens. I don't think is going to be the same thing this upcoming or tonight when the Longhorns and the Vols play. You got to limit Dalton Connect. And as we've seen, you talked a little bit about how Texas is on offense. Their offense, and this is much to our friend Justin Wells' chagrin, their offense is pick and roll, and it's pick and roll with Max Asmus and Dylan Dessou. And if those guys aren't hitting shots, then it's tough sledding for Texas. They did get some defense into offense contributions, and then some good first half contributions from guys like Tyrese Hunter, who helped that offense go in that first 20 minutes to a point it needed to. But man, you talked about how they're an easy scout at that second week. They're a pretty easy scout right now. I mean, it all runs through Dessou and it runs through Asmus. They run pick and roll. They run variations off of it, but they run a lot of that, a lot of two-man game. And, if Max Asmus isn't hitting shots at an exorbitant March Madness Oral Roberts level, then you got to find that scoring elsewhere. Aside from Dylan Dessou, who has that shooting ability? There aren't guys on this team, maybe save for Tyrese Hunter, who's been so hot or cold when it comes to shooting, who can do that. So this will be a tough one. I'm curious as to what the Vegas line will close on this game. I could see it being right under double digits, maybe something like that, maybe 9. The over under won't be very very big, but there's a lot of people saying that this is Rick Barnes' the best team he's had at Tennessee, and he's had some quality teams, makes the tournament. A lot of intrigue with Terry versus Barnes, mentor versus pupil, to say mentor versus assistant, Barnes in his old job, but should be an interesting one to track. And if Texas wins this one, it's back-to-back Sweet 16s for Rodney Terry, and that's something that as long as Texas was just lacking a tournament win, is something to be celebrated. And at that point, then you're in the conversation for it. You're playing for higher stakes the further and further you go, and you're starting to think that maybe you can make a run, but you got to get going on Saturday at about 7 p.m. in Charlotte for that to be part of the conversation. Parting thoughts on Barnes or the tournament or anything like that?
Just that if Rodney Terry gets back to the Sweet 16, he's going to be pretty well situated, right? Like I think right now there's been a little bit of hesitation with him because he inherited this like super old team last year from Beard, and them getting as far as they did was really exciting, but it was also maybe not like super indicative of what he could do as head coach in his own right. And if he can just, a Sweet 16 in his own year, first year, I think that would really help him. I don't think he needs it, but it would it would really help.
It would probably maybe not change, but alter how a lot of Texas fans view
I think
him,
I think
especially
so.
in the wake of Chris Beard, for better or for worse. So, but we'll figure that out when the ball is tipped and things get going on Saturday night. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, head to InsideTexas.com. We've got a March Madness special right now where you can get 1 month of access for $1. You do that, you will be inside Texas all the way through the spring game, and that'll put you right on the precipice of the portal window. So come join us. You're going to love it at Inside Texas. Ian, thank you so much for joining me on this Saturday roundtable, and we will see you next time on the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel, powered by InsideTexas.com.